Hi, I'm Brian. Welcome to Autogefühl and welcome to the south of France, more specifically the hills around Nice. Well, when Ford announced that they were bringing out the latest edition of their ST, a lot of people held their breath. Why? Well, the Fiesta ST has been nothing but an unmitigated success. And the Focus ST in its previous generation, well, let's just say it had more than a couple of detractors. So they had an awful lot to prove with their new model. They've changed little things about the design and the appearance and the interior, but an awful lot has gone on with the technology. Let's take a closer look and find out just what they've achieved. $1.82 in width or 71.5 inches. There's not huge amounts of change here in the design of the Focus ST. I guess my take on that would be, look, if it's not broken, why fix it? This is a very stylish, angular car. I think they've done a really nice job of keeping enough of the characteristics while giving it that really desirable sporty edge. Look, for example, at the satin finish on this grille. It makes it look as if it's an alloy. Of course, it's not, it's plastic, but it looks good and solid and fits the aggressive styling in this lower portion of the design. Lots of the features here really do add to the way that the car performs. These air intakes are real, they're not just here for show, and I think that speaks volume about the way that this car's been put together. We have a really nice angular nose to this car that sets it off and tells you that there should be an awful lot more sports to be delivered as you move further towards the back. But let's take a closer look and find out. 4.39 meters in length or 172 inches. Everything about the side profile of this car is just about adding subtle, sporty components to, I think, an already fairly successful design. Well, I say fairly successful. In any car that's as ubiquitous as the Focus, there are always going to be people who say, yeah, but I don't want to look like every other driver on the street. Well, the nice thing with the ST is you do have a more sporty look and feel. In combination with the drop-down height, which is about 10 millimeters, that's about that much off the height of the standard Focus. I really think you are going to want to go with these larger wheels. Aesthetically, it looks really pleasing. Now, if you look at the underskirting they've put right at the bottom of the door in combination with these dark alloy wheels, and I really like this bright orange color. Might not be everybody's taste, but if you're going to own a sportier version of a standard car, for me, it really needs to pop. And that's what this design achieves. Sleek, sporty, stylish, youthful, nice. But I still don't think I'm going to look too silly getting out of it. What do you think? Round at the back, we can see the most challenging design aesthetic of the ST. It's 1.49 meters in height or 59 inches right to the top of this antenna here. Why challenging? Well, this is where taking a standard chassis and adapting it is always problematic. A Focus is designed to be a family-friendly car from an aesthetic perspective. Here we have this much bulkier lower third portion. The reason for this is obviously to make it look much more sporty and dynamic. Does that work visually? Well, yes, it does. I like the integration of these new side-by-side, well, either side is what I mean, exhaust ports. They're nice and big and meaty, but subtle and discreet too. They're real and they don't have chrome tips, which I think is a good move for this car. They've spread them out rather than putting them in the middle. So should you want to, although I'd be a bit astonished if you did, you can still fit a towing hook to this car. So nice to have that option if you want it. Meanwhile, I think you need all of this bulk at the bottom to give it that sporty, dynamic appearance. But you can't change the fact that this is still a family car base. And because of that, for me, it just doesn't feel quite right at the rear. I do like this lift. I don't think it's too pronounced or too much. And I do like what they've done with the exhaust ports. I'm just not completely convinced that it all ties in together. What do you think? Well, we can talk all day about the aesthetics of this car, but this is the heart of the machine, and this is where the real changes have taken place. What you are looking at right there is one of the two engines available, and it's the petrol. 2.3 litres, 280 horsepower, 420 newton meters of torque. You get your choice between either this one or a 2-litre diesel, which is 190 horsepower, 400 newton meters of torque. Well, this one promises a 0 to 100 time of 5.7 seconds. And taking a look, I think you can see why there's been so much more development going on with this car than you might think at first. So that's giving you a lot more power than the predecessor and a lot more torque too. Of course, all of that's just fine words. What does it translate to once you get it on the road? Car keys are fairly standard affair, but you do get this nice ST logo on the back, just so when you put your keys down in the bar, everybody's sure which one is yours. Now, I want to ask Thomas to keep a fairly short focus because I'm really keen to show you this feature. This is not the first car to feature this, but I really like when manufacturers think to do this. I have no concept of how complicated it is to integrate this into a door design, but I wish every single car came with it. It's a small thing, but if you've ever had a child use your car, you will know why this is one of the greatest inventions ever to occur. Okay, enough about the door. Let's take a look inside. Well, the first thing I want to talk about here is the door design. Now, in keeping with a lot of other Fords, there is a lot of plastic going throughout this car, and some of it is not quite as nicely finished as it might be, but at price point, I really don't care about that, and I don't think most other people will either. Honestly, the controls are nicely finished, and that really is what I care about because I'm going to be touching those a lot. There's a really nice accenting detail between the handle here and just the way that the inlay is styled. And although these trim details aren't the most amazing thing that you've ever seen, there's just enough visual detail here to make this car feel a little bit more premium. The window and door mirror controls look and feel nice to use. My only complaint about this door is this pocket down here. Now, if you have a look, thanks to the design, it's incredibly shallow at the front, which is where you are most likely to be wanting to put things. You can see what the problem is with that. And I have to tell you that while driving, I've had a water bottle fall out on more than one occasion. Now, Ford may say, we thought about that. Look, we've given you enough depth to lay it flat. And that's great. But I more than expect you're going to have other things like an umbrella wedged back here. The water bottle is going there, and it's going to spend a lot of its time down by your feet. So for me, that's just a little bit of an oversight, but maybe it's not really a big one. Coming slightly further in towards the main part of the car, the first thing that we can see is the badge of Ford Performance, letting you know it was all of their hard work delivering the ST to you. I think that's a really nice touch. It's subtle enough, it's discreet enough, but it does make the kind of statement you're going to want, and most importantly, it sets you up for what's coming next, and that are these rather special Recaro seats. Why are they rather special? We've seen Recaro seats before. Well, these ones are really nicely put together for this car, and I don't just mean in terms of how they perform once you sit in them. I think the styling is spot on too. There's just enough detail here to make them feel that little bit special, but not too much. They're not overblown. They don't look like bucket seats, which a lot of the time I think are quite inappropriate in these smaller cars. So, a good compromise between style and usability? I think so. So far, it's looking great. Well, If when I sit in this car it looks a little bit difficult for me to get into, that's only because I have extremely short legs. So if you're sharp-eyed, you might notice my driving position is very far towards the front to make sure that I have enough space to reach the pedals. So there is actually a lot more room in here for a regular sized person. But because of those short legs and long torso, I am well proportioned to be able to show you the height of this car. I am 5 feet 10 or 178 centimeters, but my torso is comparable with somebody about 6'1". I know, weird, right? So if you look at my headroom, you can see that I have ample space in here. For a smaller car, this is a pleasure. This gives me a great feeling when I sit here. The driving position is really superb. High enough that I feel like I'm on top of the road, low enough in the car that I feel I have a good position of power for all of that exciting driving that I want to do. The interior of the car feels a little bit funereal when you sit in it. Everything here is very dark. Personal taste again, but I really like that. For me, that emphasizes the sportiness, and it does so in an understated way, which I'm a big fan of. So other manufacturers might be keen to put red design lines or blue design lines around the dashboard. Honestly, I like it all black. Those little carbon fiber effect details just say enough about its sports qualifications to make me feel, yeah, okay, I'm ready to drive. To get the best sense of exactly how the dashboard looks, let's fire this car up. Now, the first thing you'll have noticed, obviously, is the note of the engine as we get started. It should always start in standard mode. Let's turn this down, which I can tell you in Nice today is not a comfortable thing to be doing. What do you think, Thomas? Okay, so when we look to the dashboard, we can see that there's a nice integration of a very well-known and familiar looking Ford central digital display and 2 analog dials. There's nothing here to get that excited about, but conversely, there's nothing to get upset about either. This is just very functional, very straightforward, and if you've driven any modern Ford in, say, the last 3 years, you will be more than familiar with the way that this looks and operates. The steering wheel gives us lots of options to be able to change various elements of that and access different features of the drive without taking our hands off the wheel, which obviously in the ST is very important. Here we have the all-important sports mode button. You're going to want to know where that is and how it works, and the mode selector. Now, if Thomas can show you on the display, I'm going to show you how the mode selector looks when you cycle through. Now, because we have the performance pack fitted to this car, we also have this, which is track use. Now, clearly you don't have to be on a racetrack for that, but it does switch off your traction control. That obviously makes the car more fun to drive, but more challenging as well. So that is performance pack feature only. If you don't go with that, you're only going to get this wet mode, the standard mode, and the sports mode. One nice feature here is that if I want to instantly select the sport mode, I can do that with this button and one push, and then immediately I'm in sport. Unfortunately, if I push it again, it won't take me back to normal. I have to cycle through the modes in order to get back there. Now, other controls that I have here are obviously for the infotainment system, and using phone integration, we also can vary through different menu options on our display. But for the most part, the buttons you'll be interacting with here are going to be mode, speed, and that's about all there is. Now, the steering wheel itself is very comfortable. We have a good range of maneuverability here, so you can find exactly what suits you. I found this very comfortable and easy to use. It's not going to blow your mind, but it is going to do its job very nicely. Now, I do want to show you this feature. This has been refined significantly for this version of the ST, so you can see that we can go from full lock to full lock in only 2 full rotations of the wheel, and that should result in a very taut driving experience. Hopefully we'll get the chance to find out more about that a little bit later on. This screen will look very familiar to any modern Ford users as well. So, okay, it's not the best looking integration, it's not the best looking screen, but I am happy to tell you that there have been some changes here. The things that I notice, having spent a lot of time in newer Fords, is that they've finally put some really good care and attention into the angling, the positioning, and the quality of this display. So the protective cover here is much less anti-glare than I've seen before. The angling of the screen is great, so we get much less in the way of reflections. And not only is the definition very nice on the screen, but the responsiveness is actually pretty good too. So as long as you don't mind Ford's baked-in infotainment system, this is actually completely fine. Okay, there are better systems, I think, in my opinion. There are also better, nicer looking finishes, but this does its job really well. And after all, this car is all about the drive. So for me, this is very much a secondary concern. Now, I do think it's worth mentioning that even though we have Android Auto and Apple CarPlay here, it does have one minor irritation on its usability, which is that if you do plug in a phone, and I'll do that right now so you can see how the display changes. Hopefully it won't have any embarrassing text messages on from me. You never quite know what you're going to get when you plug your phone in. And there we go. So actually not that far to get to the system at all. What I don't like is that it is now not possible to leave the Android Auto world without unplugging the phone. I would like to be able to switch back to the car's own system and forwards. If I want to use the car's navigation and play music from my phone, that is not possible while I'm plugged in. Of course, you can achieve that using Bluetooth audio. It's just an extra step of bother I would like to be able to switch between, but maybe I'm being overly picky there. After all, it's not terribly hard just to unplug it. Very nice, uncluttered and straightforward controls here. Thank you, Ford, for giving me a good old-fashioned, easy to access volume on-off knob. That really is very straightforward indeed. And for once, this a few other manufacturers could learn from. The on-off button is only for the media and the entertainment, so I don't forever switch off my display by mistake. Very simple, very uncluttered, and if the screen bothers you while driving, you can just switch that straight off too. As you can see, it's actually pretty responsive, and I like the way the software interface works. It's a little bit of extra animation just to make you feel a bit more special, but not too much to slow it down. Coming slightly further down, very unfussy heating and cooling vents here, and then a very straightforward, easy to navigate heating and cooling system. I'm a big fan of Ford's approach to heating and cooling. It feels very intuitive, it's very easy to navigate, and there's enough differentiation on these buttons that you can stab at them while you're happily driving away around some of those lovely windy roads. Now, slightly lower down, again, I think Ford have done a great job with this. Look, we have enough space here in this center console to realistically fit 2 phones. And that's actually great because you regularly take a passenger who wants to take advantage of charging. Sadly, there's only one USB charge point, but if I'm owning this car, I'm immediately putting a second one into this lighter socket anyway, so I don't think that's a big problem. Plenty of space here for bigger phones and an inductive charging pad on the left side. Only problem we found with this in use is that obviously if you're getting the most of the sporty drive, it's pretty much impossible to keep your phone in the exact location it needs to be to charge. Well, come on. I think that's absolutely fine. You can either plug it in, and if you're driving it around town, it works great. So a really nice bit of central storage here. But this is the story in the new ST. Why? Well, it's got a 7% reduction in stick travel. So let me show you what that means. We can change gears a lot quicker and more easily. There's less distance to travel. This is a really nice, solid feeling gearbox. So when you want to slam it in, it's really going to be very pleasant to use. I like the finishing on the gear stick too. It feels great in your hand. It really gives you every bit the sporty feel that you would hope from this car. Now, this is not only giving you shorter travel, but there's also something in this car called rev matching. What that does is it instinctively matches the engine rev speed to the gear that you are going to select, and that massively reduces lag in your gear change. Why is that so significant? Well, it means that for once, instead of thinking, is there really a point to get a manual because the automatic gearbox is so good, and you can have a 7-speed automatic with the petrol engine, I am going to say that this should be fantastic once you get to driving, but obviously there's only one way to find out. Here in the middle you can see the automatic park brake and obviously the park brake itself. One slight observation, it would have been nice to have had a simple light here. You do get notification on the dashboard when you put your parking brake on. I don't know, I always think you can never have too many notifications to let you know whether your parking brake is on or not. So that's just my personal taste. Coming slightly further over, this is a really nice feature. You can see these are on runners, and what that allows you to do is to make sure that whatever the size of container you put in here, it is held exactly where you want it. And if you don't want anything in there at all, well, you can just cover it up. A nice little space here for the key. And I think that is a very nice design feature. Slightly further back, we have a movable armrest and a center console for storage with a charging point for USB. So if you want to put something a little bit more significant or some music on a USB stick, it can go back there with a handy change tray just above. Is there any room to store the essentials in the car? Well, there isn't a huge amount, but I do like this shelf up here. So you probably can take your manual and the other information that you need and keep it there and put your tissues, your pens, your sunglasses, and the 400 other things that you regularly need to drive with stowed away safely. This car is fitted with a Bang & Olufsen sound system, which I have to tell you we have tested out and I find to be good but not great. Well, maybe I'm being picky. As you can see by the speaker grille, this is not exactly their top-end kit, but it delivers a very nice musical experience. Just don't expect to be blown away by it. So how's the experience for the rear seat passengers? Well, as is so often the case, the designers have to make a hard choice here as to whether they want to go with replicating that front seat experience and costing you any usability in the middle. And here they've clearly decided that the most important thing to do is to make sure you can still fit 3 people back here. And that's clearly the right decision to make. Why? Well, as much fun as you're going to have driving around in this thing, my suspicion is most of the people buying this are still going to need to fit kids in the back at some point. And as you can see, for a smaller car, the middle seat really is not bad at all. Now, again, I mentioned while I was in the front, I do have particularly short legs, so this is really not a fair comparison. This driver's seat is set for me. This passenger seat is set for Thomas, and this gives you a much fairer impression of how much legroom you get back here. So, I have short legs, but I'm going to say once I sit into one of these wells, look at that. Even if you're over 6 foot, you're going to do pretty well back here. How's the head height? Well, once I've got the headrest positioned so I'm actually in reasonable comfort, it's actually very nice indeed. I feel good back here. I do feel like I haven't been forgotten. I always like this feature. That's great. There's no attempt made to try and make this look anything other than it is. But that said, this material is nicely finished, easy to keep clean, good storage, and look, they haven't forgotten to put a 12-volt charge point back here for my rear seat passengers' electronics. I like that. You've got 2 sets of anchor points, so you're going to be able to get 2 car seats back here. And really, I think anyone traveling in this space is going to be more than happy with the experience. Like all smaller cars, it's going to be happiest when it's got 2 rear seat passengers, and they can travel in quite a bit of comfort back here too. So with all of this power, do we still have room back here to put anything? What you are looking at is 273 litres of load space, and that is only up to the parcel shelf. So a pretty generous boot. I think we have enough space back here, and we always have a little bit more in this storage area. Now that number is only if you either have a space saver tyre, or as we have here, this is obviously the base port to the sound system. So you've got a decent amount of storage room back here if you drop those seats down. If we take the parcel shelf out and see how it works without these seats in, we can get a sense of what the full load space actually looks like. Now obviously I'm expecting you're going to be having far too much fun driving this for most of its life. Now our luggage is actually in the back, so that's not folding flat, but I'll fold the seat to the side so it's completely flat and you can see how flat it will go. There we go. So if you fold everything you now have 1,250 litres of load space. So yes, okay, there's a lip here, and yes, it's not completely flat. But come on, you're not buying this car so you can fit stuff from IKEA in the back, are you? So how does the ST behave once you actually get it out on the road? Well, the first thing that I think I have to make absolutely clear is that if you're considering buying one of these and your friends are saying, come on, it's just a facelift, and the last ST, was it really all that good? Well, I can assure you, there is very little of the DNA in this car that still remains from the previous ST. And the reason we've started off this driving section nice and slow is because there's so much to talk about that's changed here. The first thing that you notice when you sit in this car is quite what a great job Recaro have done with these seats. Now, Recaro have been making seats for an awfully long time and they feature in a very wide range of vehicles, but let's be honest, they can be a bit hit and miss, and principally the reason for that is because what they do best is design racing seats for racing. Well, that doesn't always lend itself to a particularly comfortable ride. If you can pick up on the sound, I'm not actually making that much noise at the moment. The reason for that is I'm taking advantage of the driving modes to just start off nice and gently in normal. That really does show you quite what a nice job Ford have done of getting the balance of the ST right. Why is that? Well, if you're listening carefully, at the moment you could be forgiven for thinking, is this just a standard Focus? I'm not hearing a lot of burbling that I'm expecting. There doesn't seem to be a lot of jolting up and down. I thought you said they were 19-inch rims. It looks pretty smooth for that. Well, all of those things are true, and I'm very pleased to tell you that when you have this car in normal mode, well, it really does behave remarkably a lot like a Focus. Now, before you start shouting at the screen and saying, but I don't want that, it's a Focus, but on steroids. The nice thing is you're not going to want to drive it that way all the time, because you still have to take the thing out to go pick up kids or get shopping or do errands in, and you really don't need it to behave like a track car while you're busy doing that. So one of the most important aspects of this remake for me is whether they've managed to get the balance right between that sporty, aggressive drive that you're looking for from an ST and still comfortable, practical, everyday use. And I'm happy to tell you, so far, really nice. We're just doing a nice little bit of town driving. We're just outside of Nice. We've got some nice windy roads to check out. But before we get to those, we also have some nice civilized town driving. And that's a great chance to tell you more about what the day-to-day driving experience of this car is all about. Well, first thing, driving position, excellent. Seat, fantastic. Nice and supportive, comfortable to sit in, but lots of rigidity in it for when you do want to find out more about what this car can deliver. All around visibility, excellent. It's very nice in this day of the SUV to find out that the car can still deliver so much security in terms of how you respond to it while you're just driving around town. I have to be completely honest, I've never been completely sold on the idea of everything becoming an SUV, and this car I think presents a huge amount of reasons why that is. I'm 10 millimeters lower. If you're an Imperial person, that's around about that much than a standard Focus, but I still feel very well positioned on the road. The all-around visibility is excellent, despite having that spoiler at the rear, which you might think would crush my rear visibility in my rear view mirror. It's actually great. So for day-to-day use, this car is extremely plausible. Now, obviously, there is one thing that is glaring at me while I'm driving that tells me that I am not in a day-to-day Focus, and that is the fuel consumption. We're going to do our best to get you a more realistic figure later, but in trying to rack up some rubber underneath these wheels to find out how this car behaves, it really doesn't take you a huge amount of effort to get it around about into the 14-15 litres per 100 kilometre zone. Ouch. So if you're going to make the most of driving it, and let's be honest, if you're not, why buy one? Then you are going to be spending a fair amount on fuel. But don't worry, every last drop of it is used exactly the way it should be. Well, we're out of town now, but unfortunately we still have to watch our speed. But I'm starting to hear my engine open up that little bit more. Now, whilst you can have that accentuation coming through the stereo system, the engine actually sounds very pleasant without any help at all. Lots of things have changed about the drive of this car. It isn't only that we now have 12% more power in the engine and 17% more torque, but we also have more of everything all the way round. There's now an electronic lip. Sorry, Thomas. There's an electronic limited slip differential fitted, which really has a significant effect on the handling. We also have constant damper control, and that's adjusting everything as we go along. That's really helping the driving modes. In order to give us that little bit of additional sportiness, we even have a reduced movement on the gear stick, and that means we're just that much more sporty in our feeling. But it doesn't stop there. One of my favorite features in this new car is the engine rev matching. I hope I've got that right. That's basically, if you're familiar with racing and you know about the heel toe maneuver, that's where you brake and accelerate both at the same time in order to get the most of the handling. Well, this car has a very clever way of doing that without you needing to be a professional driver. What they've done is manifested a system whereby when you put your foot on the clutch to change gear and you change gear, the engine will automatically match the revs of the gear that you're going into, and that makes for an extraordinarily smooth gear transition. Now, that might sound like a lot of technical, is it really achieving anything? You're just going to have to take my word for it. It really does make a big difference. But the best way to see that is to push this magic button here. That's S, that's for sport, and that's when things really start changing. Now, the minute I put my foot down, you can immediately get a sense of that power being released to me. I don't know if the microphone picked that up, it was just a nice little burble from the back there. Still very agile, still very light, but the weight on the steering is excellent. This has been changed from the standard Focus. It will come as no surprise to you to learn. 2 full turns is all it takes to get full lock on this car, so I have a really nice, solid but crisp and precise feel to the steer as I'm going around those corners. And thanks to that lovely dynamic gear change, well, I have absolutely no problem getting the most out of this manual gearbox. Now, that's something I really do want to let you know. It's so common now in modern cars that you try the automatic and you say, to be honest, the gearbox is so good, there's no point even thinking about the manual. This is the first time I've really enjoyed a manual gearbox since the M2 competition, so that's going back to last year. This sync rev matching that they have is just great. It makes the car effortlessly fun. So even though you have a nice sporty driving profile, you can get the most out of it really almost as soon as you sit in it, whilst politely shifting between here as we are stuck in traffic and not really being able to make the most of the engine, and putting your foot down and letting it fly. Let's see if we can find a spot where we can hear a little bit more of that burbling. Well, we've stopped here for a little bit, and that's just so that we can develop a bit of space between us and the car in front. That should give us a bit of time just to show you. Apologies for redlining first there. As you can tell, the safety systems won't allow me to do any damage to the engine. That's because I just pulled out into traffic, but I did want to give you a little taste of how that acceleration feels. It's really nicely delivered. The gearbox is so smooth, and as you can see, even if you make a stupid beginner mistake like not changing gear, the car already has your back. Everything is just designed to allow you to get the maximum of enjoyment out of the car. And that's good, because there are a couple of quirks that I'm not 100% convinced about while you're driving it. Chief amongst those is the integration of these features right here on the steering wheel. What don't I like about it? Well, this car's fitted with the performance pack, and for me, if you're going to go with an ST, that's a must. That's going to give you the most that this car can deliver. That does give you track mode. Track mode Yes, you guessed it, switches off some of those all-important safety systems and allow you to have a lot more fun. What do I mean by that? Well, the car's a lot looser, it's less controlled, and you can experience a lot more of your own driving ability rather than the car's extraordinary skill in electronic safety control. But don't worry, not too much. You can't switch everything off, and it does keep you safe. However, because of the way that the driving modes are set up, and they are very nicely delivered, I may say, it does create one minor issue. Well, if you go with the car as a standard fit out, then you will only have that driving mode button and the sports button. That keeps you nice and distinctly different. If you want it in sports, you hit the S and that's it. If you want it in either normal or there's also a wet mode, you just hit the mode button. Problem is, there was nowhere left to put the track mode. So even though we have that nice, distinct and separate sports mode button, we have nothing for track mode except cycling through those modes. This was a little bit of response to the experience of previous ST drivers. They didn't really like all of that cycling just to find sports. Hence the sports button. It works great. I would have loved a track button. Why? Well, imagine it. You're driving through town, or maybe outside of town, road conditions start getting a little bit challenging and unpredictable. So you think, okay, great, I'll put it in wet mode. That's what it's there for after all. But you're not paying full attention. You press the button one too many times, and instead of having additional safety and a more responsive handling of the car, you're suddenly in track mode with even less to keep you safe than you had in standard. Now you might think that's kind of a moot point. After all, you instantly recognize in the driving feedback which mode you're in. But many times people don't change mode until at least 20 seconds after they probably should have done. So it's something that's just worth thinking about. I also would have liked a little bit more ergonomic design going into these buttons. To be honest, it's not the most natural thing in the world to pick the difference between sports mode and the standard mode button. They certainly don't have any clear markings on them to help you out with that choice. But you know what? After you've owned the car for a week, pretty sure you'll know where that sports button is. Very well indeed. With a 0 to 100 time of 5.7 seconds, once you do find yourself with a little bit of open road and some cyclists, it's no problem at all to nicely blast by them. Now, we've got lots of twisty, windy road here, and if I can find a bit of space between cyclists, it's a really great place to be able to show you just a little taste of what this car can deliver. As I said, we've got a 0 to 100 time of 5.7 seconds, but if you want to go with the estate version, that's only going to cost you about 0.1. So really, a lack of speed is no reason not to go for that extra room if you need it. For me, for styling and just sheer drivability, I'm gonna stick with this one. I think it just feels right for this car, and it really is everything that you expect this car to deliver. Yeah, I know, I've always been a big fan of the estate version of the Golf R, largely for the surprise factor that it delivers when you blast past people with half of IKEA sitting in your back parcel shelf. But for this one, I'm going to stick with a sedan. Now, you should be able to pick up on the microphone just a little bit of that lovely noise. And if we can ever find some road that doesn't have 1,000 cyclists on, good grief. I'm not sure I've ever seen quite so many cyclists in one place. Then we can show you some of this lovely handling. I think even just using your ears alone, you can get a good sense of why I am such a fan of this manual gearbox. It just is a pleasure to use. The shorter throw really reacts well. Honestly, I could have even used it a little bit shorter, but it still feels nice and sporty and responsive when you're working your way through the gears. So, the weight on the steering is the most notable thing. Once you start putting some speed into the corners, it feels just right. There's just enough heft to make you feel that you really do have control. That tighter steering response and the much more aggressive lock turn that you have on the wheel means that you have much more weight and solidity when you do power into corners. Brilliantly, the way that the limited electronic slip differential is applied to the wheels mean that you never experience any understeer whatsoever. If you turn off that traction control, so you get a little bit more fun. Then you can feel a bit more movement at the back, but you never have any feeling at all that there's any loss of traction between you and the road. Now, we haven't had the opportunity to test out the wet mode to see how the car handles once you start putting it in some challenging circumstances, and I have to be honest, the roads around Nice are superb, so it's not as if we're also having the opportunity to test it out on some looser ground. But I think this is a pretty good representation of where most people are going to spend most of their time driving, and it really does feel nice. The only thing that is worth mentioning here, because we have the performance pack, we've got those 19-inch rims, and although it is very comfortable and polite once you put it in standard driving mode, I think realistically, if where you live has got some rougher ground, you're going to feel it in this car. Obviously, it's all set for sports driving, and that really isn't particularly kind on your bottom once it comes to lots of speed bumps. Thomas and I noticed that earlier when we were driving through town. So as long as you've got pretty decent roads to get the best out of the driving experience, trust me, you're really not going to mind the slight compromise in lack of comfort for what you get out of pure driving pleasure with this car. Now, I'd really like to show you a little bit of acceleration, so I think we're going to try and find a little bit of open space just to be able to punch it down. I really want to show you how it handles once you swing it into a corner at speed. Finally, a fairly empty piece of road. Thomas, what do you think? Is this going to work?
Yeah, I hope so.
Okay, we have waited a long time to find some road with no cyclists and good curves. So here we are, finally. We are at Griolier, just outside of Nice, and this is the Focus ST. So we're in sports mode right now. And if you didn't know it by the way that the car handles, the satisfying burbles at the end of a gear change just let you know. Now, 5.7 seconds is not the fastest 0 to 100 time in any car you've ever driven. This car really doesn't start explaining itself to you until you can find some nice corners to throw it round. And then you really can see the sum of how all of this engineering comes together in the new ST to really revolutionize the way this car behaves. And I think it's long overdue in terms of how it presents in the lineup. To be honest, some of the competitors have really been putting this car in the shade in its previous form. Well, when Ford handed this over to its performance division and told them, come on, make us a beast, they certainly took the most of the opportunity to make sure it got right back to the front of the pack. So, how does it drive in comparison to its competitors? Well, that's a really interesting question to answer. It's not easy to give you a straightforward answer. Is it the fastest of the bunch? No, it's not. Does it have the most versatility? Probably not. But is it the most fun? Honestly, after having spent at least 300 kilometers driving it, I'm gonna say it just might be. It's got a really nice balance between usability for a day-to-day point of view and just pure fun. The engineering has all worked out so nicely together that the driving experience of this car is just superb. And I think even more enjoyable when you bear in mind where it comes from. Look at those brakes, just lovely. Effortless, smooth, precise. And when you get past the hazard, power comes straight back again. One thing I really do think is worth mentioning about this car, and before I say it, bearing in mind this could just be my personal taste, obviously at Autogefühl we drive an awful lot of different cars, and they take a varying amount of time to feel comfortable in and get used to. This car has taken the least amount of time for me to feel at home in, I think, of any car that I've driven, certainly this year. After 5 minutes driving this car, it felt like I'd owned it for the last 2 years. And that's really quite some achievement. Now, that does mean that you can spend most of your time focusing on just how enjoyable it is to drive. But the biggest benefit of all, to me personally, being a slightly older guy, is I have to tell you, I am so comfortable and I fit so nicely into this car. Now that could just be because it suits me and my body shape, but I really feel I'm exactly in the road position that I want to be. The height is perfect for this vehicle. I'm low enough, but still high enough to get the perspective over the road that I want. The visibility is fantastic. The Recaro seat's great, but more than any of that stuff, the drive delivery is superb. A lot of the time with Ford vehicles, especially the newer ones, when I sit in them before I drive them, I spend an awful lot of time looking around me thinking, there's a lot of plastic here, and I'm not completely convinced about the finishing. Some of these controls I'm absolutely certain could be better laid out, and it's not the most intuitive system to navigate for you as the driver. But the minute that you start driving this car, you couldn't care less about any of that. Why? Because everything about how the engineering has been applied to the ST just makes driving it such a pleasure. And thanks to Recaro, such a comfortable pleasure. That all of this, you know what? I'll figure that out and get used to it. This does what I can't change and what I need most of all, and that is to give me fun while driving. Now, there is a downside to all that fun, clearly, and that is fuel economy. We have tried not to be too enthusiastic with the car, but obviously we need to make sure we know how it drives. And for us, over the time of our testing with this vehicle, that has delivered 14.6 litres of fuel efficiency per 100 kilometres driven. Ouch! For such a small car, that is an awful lot of fuel to be going through. So I think it's probably worth mentioning, if you're going to get the best out of the drive here, it is not going to be delivering you spectacular economy figures. But you know what? That number does change significantly when you drive it a little more gently. So in day-to-day usage, added up all at the same time, I'm probably still going to be expecting a number around about 11 to 12 litres. And that's a lot for a smaller car. And it's certainly an awful lot more than Ford will quote you for this vehicle when you go to look at it. But take it out, test drive it, see what your driving style does to that number. Maybe I'm just being a little bit too enthusiastic about enjoying everything the car can deliver. But all in all, driving experience, absolutely superb. If I had a hat, I would take it off to Ford. I think they have done fantastic things with the redesign of this car. And if it's anything to talk about where Ford is going in future, then I think it's certainly the right direction. Well, after some lively debate on the way back to the airport, we decided that it was probably worth putting a note at the end of this piece. Just to say, of course, if you drive the car sensibly, you can achieve below 10 litres in fuel consumption. My point was, yes, but who's buying an ST and driving it sensibly? Well, certainly not me. How about you? So the Focus ST, does it all add up to a sum of its parts? Well, I'm going to give it a resounding yes. Why? Well, at its price point, which depending on your region comes in around about between 30 and 35,000 if you go with the optional extras, and I honestly can't for the life of me understand why you would get an ST without that performance pack. Trust me, you want everything that they can throw at this car. There are a lot of competitors at this price point, but I still really think that this stands nicely out at the front of the pack, and the reason is because of the way in which everything integrates and works so well together. I can honestly tell you, this is the most fun I've had driving a car in this price bracket all year so far. Can you compare it with its predecessor? Honestly, for me, no. This is a significant step forwards. If you have an ST currently and you're asking yourself, should you change to a new one? Please go and give this a drive. The engineering, the electronics, it is so well thought through. I can only congratulate Ford Performance on what they've done with this car. It's superb. Yes, there are bits and pieces about it that I still niggle with slightly. I'm not a huge fan of the user interface. Some of the styling I don't think completely works, but as a total package, I think it is just about possibly the most fun you can have at this price point. Usually, when I'm reviewing a car like this, I have to compare it to its smaller sibling. Why? Because that's almost as much fun, almost as much power, and it's always cheaper. well, you get significantly more with the Focus than you can achieve with a Fiesta ST. If you doubt me, trust me, you just have to try it to experience it. I'm not 100% convinced about these 19-inch wheels when it comes to driving the car. Certainly around town, if the roads are not perfect where you live, you will be feeling them on a daily basis. But for sporty and agile driving, they're fantastic. So if you're looking for a car in this sector, don't take my word for it. Take one out, give it a drive, and please let us know how you find it. If you have any comments or questions, please put them below. Please subscribe, and we hope we'll see you all again soon.